Thanks everybody for coming. We've got a really exciting panel this afternoon or evening or wherever you are on emerging publications and trying to redefine the narrative on synthetic biology, biotech, biohacking, all this kind of thing. And this was something that on the we thought was important to do at the moment, or something to highlight, because we want to try and make sure that biotech and biohacking and all this stuff is covered fairly in the media and things. So one of the ways we do this is by having sort of our own sort of publications and things about this. So we've got some amazing speakers. We've got Pearlman, who's an editor of and a writer at Biodesigned, Christina Agapakis from Ginkgo Bioworks and Grow by Ginkgo and Ferment.tv, Ewen Chardronnet from Makery.info, and Nina Alli, who's coming from the biohacking village at Defcon, a host of the amazing podcast, White Hats and Lab Coats as well. So thank you so much to all you guys for joining us. Really excited to talk to you today. I wonder if we just start and you could all take just a minute or two to introduce yourselves and the publications that you'll be talking about today. Alex, you're the top left on my screen. I'll just go clockwise around on my screen, so you go first.
Sure. Okay, I'm Pearlman. I am a co-organizer of BioSummit and was involved in organizing this panel. So just also wanted to say thank you to John and Nina and Christina and Ewen for having this conversation. And I'm an editor at a brand new magazine called Biodesigned, which focuses on, you guessed it, biodesign. And it's really, it's actually published by Biodesign Challenge, which is a nonprofit educational organization that holds an annual conference where students can compete with each other with super imaginative biodesign works. And we thought that the topic was growing, the field was growing, and that there were a lot of different ideas and different definitions about biodesign, as well as some like really interesting sort of political topics that intersect with the idea of where biotechnology, art, design, and rethinking sort of like how we're going to live in the future, and that we're very much at the beginning of something. So we wanted to sort of take all of that and put it in one place where we could sort of start redefining narratives around an emerging field. And so Biodesigned is very new. We're only on our 3rd issue, but I'm really excited about the potential for this particular field of science, art, technology, as well as this brand new publication. So thanks everyone for listening to this talk.
Thanks, Alex. Christina, I have you next.
Sure. I'm Christina Pakis. I'm the creative director at Ginkgo Bioworks. We're a synthetic biology company in Boston, and my role is sort of running the brand and communication. How do we what's the interface between our technology and society? So I think a lot about how do we communicate to the media, to other scientists, to customers, to everybody. And so we tend to well, I think that most corporate communications in biotech is horrible and boring. And so we try really hard to make it not horrible and boring, and to sort of challenge ourselves to think differently, and to communicate differently about what this technology is and what it could be, and to bring more people into that conversation. And so one of those experiments is Grow by Ginkgo. It's a magazine. We started it last year, so we are putting out a print edition once a year, and then have been doing some digital, sort of more digital magazine online at growbyginkgo.com. And the idea is really like anything about sort of synthetic biology in the making, right? Like what is it, what could it be, and where does it sort of intersect in interesting ways with what people care about? And so again, like as an object, I think we want it to be something that's really beautiful and immersive, and tells lots of different kinds of stories about synthetic biology. But it also kind of like brings you through brings a lot of different kinds of people, and little different kinds of perspectives into the field too. And not what you would expect from a magazine, I hope, that a corporation is putting out, right? So in a way, it's also sort of intended as a Trojan horse, right? Like we give it to all of our investors, to all of our customers, and like snuck inside is like a lot of politics, and a lot of STS, right? And so because that's what we want to do, right? And we want to change, we want to change the way that people are kind of thinking about the potential of the technology. So that's what I do.
That's cool. Thanks, Christina. Some great words there. Nina, I've got you next there.
I had to write everything down because I tend to get weird about my bio. So
okay.
Executive Director of the Biohacking Village, it's 6 years old. I've run it for 5 years. And just background on it, we have 3 sub-labs under it. One is for speakers, one is for a medical device lab where we bring in medical device manufacturers and let them have face-to-face contact with the hacker community. And the hacker community can then literally put their hands on the devices and show vulnerabilities and talk through with whatever they're going on with it, whatever they found. And then we have a catalyst lab where we bring in citizen scientists, DIY bio things, because I have 2 master's degrees and people would not fund a microfluidics product that I was working on. And that infuriated me to a point of resistance. And then I got angry. So,
yeah.
So now, because all the medical device manufacturers are there, I'm like, you know what, go 2 doors down and there's a whole bunch of people that you need to have a conversation with because they may be your next product. So just in the vein of that, we also have the podcast, White Hats and Lab Coats, where we bring in a lot of the medical device manufacturers, DIY biologists, citizen scientists, people that are in the field, particularly that have something to do with cybersecurity. And this also includes patients because we tend to forget that they are involved in that ecosystem. So I have a thing of not prepping people with questions and I pepper them with attacks and assaults on all sides, but it's mostly to get to the crux of the situation and understand, so this is what we're doing, how do we make it better, how do we make it accessible for just everybody.
Awesome, thanks Nina. And last of all, for introductions is Ewen.
Hello everybody. Yeah, I'm Ewen Chardronnet. I'm based in Paris, not XYZ. And I'm chief editor of Makery magazine, Makery.info. It's a bilingual French-English magazine. We cover, in general, it's about maker culture, DIY culture, fab labs, maker spaces, hacker spaces, and of course, DIY bio, but also art and science, bio art, a lot of things like that. But really, we are talking a lot about creative communities in general. We like to follow communities, and maybe more than being too technical. And we follow the people, and we do a lot of portraits of bio artists, biohackers, and we worked lately a lot on the COVID situation with what was going on in the maker spaces, the building PPEs or things like that. We worked with Just White and Giant Lab and Thomas Landrin, close friend. And lately we are starting new programs also around art and medical context. And I tell this more about it later.
Oh, can't wait to hear it. So the first question that I'd really like to ask you guys is sort of for all of you, and please just chime in as you feel appropriate. And of course, I should say there'll be time for questions from the audience and things at the end of the session, things as well. So put all that in the chat and stuff for that for later on. But yeah, first of all, I'd really like to ask you, what are you guys doing at your publications to prepare for the future that we're all foreseeing that sort of demands mainstream reporting on synthetic biology? I wonder if Christina, I'm gonna ask you first.
What do you mean?
So hopefully, we're talking about, or the way I foresee it is that we're going to see like system change from synthetic biology and stuff, right? We've got the power now in theory to tinker within the fabric of our existence, to sort of talk about it in sort of flowery language. So what is Ginkgo doing or how are your projects preparing that for the future, or preparing reporting on?
We're trying to make that happen, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the goal, right? Like I want people to like think about synthetic biology, hear synthetic biology and be like, oh, cool. Like that's going to be the next big thing, rather than like, oh shit, you're going to start the next pandemic. Right. And so like, that's, I think that's a very common reaction, like, especially if you talk to like policymakers people in government, right? It's a sort of like, yeah, the kind of consumer reaction is like, oh, this is GMOs. And so like we've kind of like leaned into GMOs and the storytelling there too, right? And then the goal, yeah, with all of these projects is, yeah, how do you make synthetic biology a household name? How do you make this something that people care about? Because it's about us, right? Like it's about the food that we eat, our bodies, our health, our futures, the environment. There's so much that is so relevant to people that, yeah, like, you know, like the government just put up together like quantum.gov. And for me, I'm like, who gives a shit about quantum? Like, what about biology, right? Where's biology.gov? And so I want sort of like that same sort of like sense of like ambivalence, but hope, and like understanding of like what's going to be like, that it's going to be important, and we need to shape that importance for us. That like I feel is like really present right now around AI and the dialogue around AI. Like, how could that be about biology? And like that's what we're trying to do with all of our messaging and what we're putting out.
I want to jump in on that too. I want to jump in and say, like, I think what Biodesigned, and I think all of these projects have like a very particular role to play in this eventual like future where we're shaping the narrative right now, because right now it's not a mainstream thing. Like you say, like the government, where is the attention, right? Mm-hmm. But so in the context of Biodesign, which is kind of like a niche under this umbrella, right? I think one of the things that we were trying to do and have been trying to do and will continue to try to do is tell the stories of actual practitioners. And so we've had a column consistently, what biodesign means to me, because we have this opportunity at the very beginning of what will be an entirely new redefining of basically everything in the world, as you say. And the people who are doing it, though, have the opportunity to make it not scary, to make it, to say, explain, like, this is what it means to me. Like Corinne wrote a beautiful piece about bio quilts and like making a bio quilt. That's like cozy. That's not scary. And so like giving the opportunity to the practitioners to tell their own stories and to have their own narratives is something that I think is really like lays the groundwork to get us into the mainstream in a way that is not scary.
Can I add to this?
Yes.
I love all of this, by the way. So in terms of shaping the narrative, when we're at the Biohacking Village and when we're talking about the podcast as well, so many of the cyber folks are like, cyber is fun, cyber is cool. And I'm like, you have not considered the biological side, because when you do something in the cybers with the binaries and the 1 and the 0s in your line of code, it's going to hit a person. Because when I do something in the cyber, all I see is whatever code is there. And I'm not looking at, oh, there's a patient. Oh my God, there's a patient, when I finally figure that out. And then it's like, fuck, what did I just do? But on top of this, one of the things that we try to do is meeting everybody where they are, as in terms of where biology is, because we can talk about the synthetic biology and we can talk about DNA and all the things, but if people don't understand the basic stuff around biology, we can't move them forward with it. So that's just something that I keep always in the back of my head, and I wanted to throw that out to the rest of you folks.
Can I ask you, I want to make biosecurity as cool as cybersecurity, right? Because I do feel like cybersecurity, like, what do you think? I mean, they're nerds, right? Like, they're like ultra nerds, but it's still like cool, right? Like, it's cool to be an InfoSeek. It is not cool to be in biosecurity, right? Like, the biosecurity people are like suits, right? And so like, why? It's crazy to me, right? So like, look at what's going on right now. Like, this is biosecurity. Like, this is it, right? Well, what can we do? And so like, I want it to be there. So like, maybe we should talk, like, how do we make biosecurity cool?
So I'm completely involved and invested. And one of the people that came to speak last year coined the term full stack biotechnologist. Mm-hmm. And I throw that out at everybody now, because I'm like, you have to understand all the sides of the everything to be a really good biomedical anything, whether whatever part of this you're doing, and we lose that, and there's just so many issues around it. Please continue. I'm sorry, I'm going to mute you.
No, I thought that's what we wanted that discussion. I love what you said about how maybe like people that are not in cyber stuff are less good at considering that human element, and I wonder if maybe just in biotech in general and the training of the people coming up with it, do you think that's just a because it's bio and it's tangible, it's our lives and stuff, that naturally bounces off, or is there something that we've instituted to make that happen? What do you guys think about that?
If you ever ask anybody what they remember about their biology class, it's always that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and that is where it ends. and that's kind of exhausting because there's so much more power in the cell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it's just going back to, we have a lot of knowledge, and like Christina said, it's one of those situations where we need to start holding hands in a much better way. And so at the Biohacking Village, there have been so many comments of, are you going to start the next war? And I'm like, with what? With what? I didn't even think of that person. But we've got to challenge ourselves just as much as they're challenging us to say, why would you think that about me?
That's great. Yeah, I agree with you.
I'd say like, I would say I have not felt that most biotechnology people think a lot about the human side. I would challenge you there a little bit, and sort of like, I'm sure there are, I think in general, right? Like I think the synthetic biology community, certainly like the community bio community, like that's such a driving force. Right? I'm thinking about like, this is a community we are building, right? This is a discipline we are designing, right? We want to like create the standards for this community. So like they do, I think like very, very explicitly think about that, but there are a lot of sort of like human and cultural factors and social and political factors that I do not believe are like top of mind. They're certainly not how we are trained. And like, yeah, so I trained in biology and synthetic biology. Like I had to sort of leave the lab in order to find that. I don't know if other people feel that same way, right? Like to me, like the writing we do, like with Grow, with everything, like is about like, has been like my desperate attempt to learn these things because I don't feel like we get it as scientists.
I feel like that's where biodesign sort of bridges though, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a lot of artists and human-facing concerns that of folks who have come from the arts, who have come from not science backgrounds and discovered biology as a way to sort of make human lives better and to use biology and the biotech and synthetic biology to sort of solve a lot of problems that humans created, but then also humans need to solve, right? And so I think that there's this concept of design, and which is like a totally different group than the biosec people, because for sure, like it's some overlap, but not a ton. But I think that growing that sort of middle ground where everyone can be interested in design and sort of like, how do we design biotech and bioproducts and get out of the lab into a way that people can actually use it, interact with it, make it helpful. There needs to be more of this like middle ground as well.
So one of the problems that I find with medical device manufacturers is that they have these teams of of the tech people that are in the room and building the thing, and that's cool, but they never go back and consult with the bio folks. I was at a conference once where it was all the tech people, and they brought something up and they were going to change physician workflow. And I was like, nobody in this room can make that determination because you haven't asked them about their patient workflow, their workflow in the clinic. You can't do that. And they were like, no, but everybody we need is in this room. And I was like, absolutely not. I want you to write it down in the notes that I'm against this, and we are going to wait for somebody else with a louder voice to be in this room. So I'm totally on board with the biotech not understanding the bio. They're building this stuff as the way they understand it, but I'm always a big proponent of like, you need to go work in a hospital, or you need to go take a 101 class at a minimum just to understand how there's this water flow effect that you need to understand.
I'll pick up a bit on what both of you are saying. Like Alex, you said sort of like the designers are thinking about like, how do you make things better? The designers, like meeting designers and who are kind of part of this field, like changed my whole career, right? Like they were the ones who really like shaped the questions that I wanted to ask, and like even that I could ask those kinds of questions, right? And so Daisy Ginsburg in particular was somebody who helped me like see a lot of that, and she wrote her whole PhD on what does better mean. in synthetic biology, right? Like, what do we mean when we say better? Like, who is it better for? And once, you know, knowing that she was writing that and like seeing all her work about this, like I see it everywhere. And it is something that like, it really bears like, yeah, like it begs the question, I don't know if I'm using it the right way, right? Like, you know, you see like in Trexon's tagline, better DNA, like what does that even mean, right? Like better for who, right? And so that's the other piece too. And I think it's something that this community or yeah, you have to bring the people in the room. Like you're saying, like, it's better to do it this way, but like, well, is it going to be better for the patient? Like, is it going to be better for the doctor who's actually like ordering this? Is it going to be better for the people like, and the outcomes and you know, who else has to be there to make that determination of what better actually means?
So I want to maybe move on, maybe ask a different question now. And I want to ask you a little bit about, we kind of touched on this a little bit, and I think that maybe it makes sense to move on to a bit more about how you're representing sort of all the stories in there. So obviously it's really exciting and trendy to talk about the invention of a new technology and stuff. And Alex, you've talked about the panel you have about speaking to practitioners and stuff. But I wonder if we'd like to bring Ewen into the conversation a bit as well about but yeah, how are you reporting on that sort of pipeline of invention to end users and sort of all the fallout that can happen in between is what's Makery's attitudes towards that? I think you're on mute, Ewen.
Oh, you don't hear me?
Yeah,
no, we do.
Now we hear you.
Didn't get the question very well, sorry.
I'm sorry, Ewen. I just want to ask you your sort of approaches and opinions on including sort of all the voices in the pipeline or the chain of events from sort of invention of new technologies straight through to end users and everything that happens in between there. All the Alex talked about practitioners and stories and things in Biodesigned. How's Makery approaching that?
You know, Mercury, we are it's 10 p.m. here in France, by the way. I'm on the Sunday evening.
Oh,
Yeah, well, Mercury is, you know, we are a small team, but we are all distributed. Some people are based in several places in France, in UK, in Japan. So we talk a lot and we try to be ourselves informed on what's going on and try to report that. We do our best. The field is growing more and more, so it's hard to, we don't grow that much compared to the field always growing. So, and I'm not a biologist myself, and we cover also different topics. But I really believe we approach it a lot through, let's say, like this summer, we've been following a lot of camps and summer camps and gatherings where people get in a remote location to be together and do, you know, build things, DIY, get together, talk. We had several walks following several camps on that. And I strongly believe that bioart and biodesign can really help to, you know, when it touch issues on society, you know, can have really a great impact on how people can understand what is actually going on in the biological field, which is moving so fast these days. So we really believe that, yeah, following the scene, we'll follow a lot the European scene, I have to say, in the bioart, but I really believe this is having a strong impact on how people get to understand things. So this is one of our main focus. I don't know if I answered well your question, but maybe.
I really liked what you said about the using bioarts and things, because maybe this is a really good way to inject some of that into the conversation as, you know, as a provocation, right? Covering some of this stuff.
Yeah, some, of course, controversial artworks are interesting, but because they raise issues that people don't really understand. Like you were mentioning Daisy Ginsburg, it's very interesting to me, and what you do also, Christina, is very interesting to us, what we would like to follow. So Yeah, controversial is interesting for sure. And it's for press is interesting, that's for sure. People want to know a lot more about that. We also notice like people want to hear voices. They want to read the interviews mostly. I've been receiving a lot of feedbacks lately. It's like, yeah, the best it's interviews. You know, just reports and festivals or gatherings. They don't really care about that so much. But reading what people actually have to say, so it's really been read. So we try to give a lot of space for that, and long interviews, and we already do focus on that. And then we do a lot of networking too. We connect with different organizations in Europe in BioArt, and we partner through EU fundings, you know, federal fundings. So we work with BioArt Society in Finland, we work with VAG Society in Netherlands, Kapelika Institute in Slovenia, and we are a community by somehow. So we talk a lot. We build cooperation. So we are not like a classical media in a way. We are not like financed by private money. We rely a lot on public funds and cooperations. Yeah, we try to build networks, yeah, a lot in the European community, and
Really,
also in Africa, Asia as well.
well, you mentioned there about your readers love leaked interviews and real people's stories and stuff, and how you build relationships with different networks and stuff to try and do that. I think, Nina, it's something you've done a really great job with in the podcast, right? And I wonder, how do you, because you know loads of different interviews with different people and stuff there. It's really cool. How are you building relationships with people? Where are those stories coming from? Do people come to you and say, I want to be on the podcast, or do they like, or do you got people that you think are cool and have interesting stories?
Yeah, we don't do podcasts. We just do written interviews. But we are a magazine, but we are also producers. We produce artworks or BioArt or Art and Med, or we are also a producer. So we also have relations.
Nina has a great podcast though that's doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
I wonder if you. Sorry, yeah.
We don't do much podcast now, but some of my stuff.
Nina does though. I think the question was directed at Nina about her podcast.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay.
I like the intro. Just keep it going. Me and you. Do you want to be on next? So I think primarily the way that we figure it all out is who's doing cool next gen stuff, because we all know that the healthcare community is kind of set in their ways, doing their things. But it's more about insight into the mindset of what's going on with the medical devices, how they're moving things forward. We've had DIY biologists, citizen science come on, scientists come on, and it's like, what cool new thing are you working on? What does nobody know about the things that you're working on? And then the thing that I think throws everybody off once people start listening is, so what's your day job? And then it's like, I make Post-it notes, but at night, they are making all of these grand next gen synbio stuff. And I think that throws the biomedical community off, because it's like, how are you making Post-it notes during daytime stuff, but you don't have a degree to be doing all of these things? And it's like, oh, you missed the memo. We don't need degrees to do this anymore. Like, we are self-learning. We are a community. We have come together. We are doing this. We are slaying just because of what we're doing together.
Cool. Thanks, Nina. Okay, we've got a few minutes left that I can ask you another question. I want to ask one that's going to be a little bit, I don't know, it's more provocative, I don't know. But I want to ask you about how you feel like your publications specifically maybe have a responsibility about reporting on self-experimentation and also on animal experimentation without any ethical oversight. Because obviously it's something that is possible now. And I'd really love to hear your opinions about, do you have any objectives about how you want to cover that? Do you want to cover the debate itself, or do you think that your publication has a role in that debate and shaping maybe what the outcome might be? Anyone can chime in. I'd love to hear from any of you. I know, Alex, you've got strong opinions about this.
Well, I feel like I mean, I only can speak for myself, and that I don't represent my publication entirely. I can only represent the pieces that I write. But I do think that the media, and specifically the media that comes out of this community, has a responsibility to elevate the debate to a higher level than we've currently seen in the mainstream media. And that, you know, we tend to see a very one-sided, repetitive, at this point, boring side of that debate that features the same characters and the same stories, and even the same like interviews on the other side. You see the same bioethicists showing up in interviews over and over again. They're mostly men, they're mostly white, they mostly have academic backgrounds and very little connection to this community. And so I think at just like at my intention is just to elevate the debate just like past that. And so, you know, and open it up for more voices. And I try to do that by, you know, talking to the folks that I write about and being educated and staying in touch with this community. But at the same time, I think that, you know, any sort of publications that exist here should also feel a responsibility to include as many voices in that narrative as possible. And so while it's just me like repping myself, you know, I think if more people want to talk about that and write about that and you know, have any sort of opinions, especially on animal experimentation, that's one that doesn't get elevated enough, I think, where everyone's very obsessed with like controversial self-injections and self-experimentation on humans. But yeah, I mean, animal experimentation in this community, as well as environmental concerns and you know, there are a lot of different living things that are stakeholders in this conversation. So elevating that is a huge priority for myself, for sure.
Awesome answer. I agree. Yeah, living things as stakeholders. Yeah, lab rats and things as stakeholders. What about you, Nina? What's your thoughts about that?
Oh, it's like you knew. So Sarah Ware.
I could tell.
This is what I took away from the question. So Sarah Blossom Ware has been working on an IRB for Institutional Review Board for the bio community. And I think they landed on the name, do not quote me because I may be wrong in the future, Community-Led Ethics Assessment and Review for Biohacking. So it would be clear biohacking. And then it would be a bunch of us folks just getting together and saying, this is great, this is not great, words, and moving forward with it. So it would be a bunch, like Alex said, it's a bunch of folks from different academic areas or just from the community saying, yes, we agree, we don't agree.
But what about on the podcast? Like in your publication, do you feel like you have a responsibility to elevate that conversation or have both sides of it? Or, you know, are you covering it? Have you had anyone come on?
We had Sarah on there, and I was like, talk about the IRB, because everybody thinks we're doing all this fuckery in the lab and just doing all these things just because. I said they need to know that we are self-regulating. We don't so one of the comments I actually made in the beginning was, we could take the IRB the way that it's set up currently and reformat it the way that it should be, because there's so many different parameters and just hard stops when you're in an IRB. How can we make it more flexible for the community that we live in and work in?
Okay. Go ahead, Christina. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think, I'm an institutional biologist, right? So like I'm coming at it from a different perspective. But I think like we do have to be careful actually about like what self-regulation is and how that sounds, right? Like, because I think like there's also like a really long history of like fuckery from science, like capital S science, right? Of like, yeah, just sort of taking ownership over things and like just doing whatever they feel like, right? And saying like, oh, don't worry, we're self-regulated, right? Or like, like a lot of the sort of biosecurity concerns, I think, are often sort of like, again, like, oh, well, you know, we're regulating. And it's hard to actually kind of like get through to like what that meat of the problem, right? Like, what is it for? Who is benefiting? Who is like, who are, you know, who's at the table, like that's hard to do. Like governance is hard, right? And so to me, like the goal with the sort of media side, right? Or like Grow, Ferment TV, like having these kinds of conversations or opening up conversations is about sort of like challenging that like fundamentally, right? Like, you know, what should it be? Yeah, and I think it is a really, really complicated and sort of like really tricky place, right? Because I mean, again, like coming from where I'm coming from, like, and the kinds of questions that I get from the media, right? So like where like people will be like, oh, like this has literally happened to me. There's a Wall Street Journal article where I like gave the reporter a tour and I was like, look at all our cool robots. Like we can do so many cool things and we're going to fix things. And it was like, here, Christina gave me a tour of the robots. But what if a hacker takes it and then kills everyone on Earth? Now think about that, right? Constantly, right? And so like it's there no matter what, right? And so like we have to engage with that. Like what is the biosecurity that we should build? What is governance that is going to be international and global? That's not, but is also community led, right? And like you have to have a good organization and people driven things, and you have to have like a higher order kind of oversight. And you have to have like a conversation of like what are our ethics? Like what is the process by which we like make these kinds of decisions when things are gray always, right? So I don't know, that's what your question made me think of, and that's the point of Grow for me.
So I want to add a delineation because biosecurity by World Health Organization is purely agricultural. So when we use that word, it's agricultural because of the cows and things, and then we have the biosecurity labs. So when people say biosecurity, I always ask, so are you talking about biosecurity in like the lab sense, or are you talking about biocybersecurity, which is also going to be coined as a term, I think, maybe. So I guess
I talk about what I hear from folks in the government folks I talk to, it's about sort of like, can you synthesize viruses and send them out to places? That's what people worry about when they worry about biosecurity. Yeah.
Oh, go Ewen.
Yeah.
That's serious.
Regarding the mass media, how they treat the issues, that's also why we want to do we do a media for the community, by the community, and we really believe strongly that we have to build a corpus, a content, an archive too. We've been writing for 5 years now. It's a large archive, and we can now see the mass media, especially during the COVID lockdown. Spring coming to our own archive as a source of info, because when they started to understand that, actually biolabs or makerspaces are doing things and they have no clue. They don't know much about it. I mean, they don't understand much about it. And so they were using our own archive, and I will receive calls for like, I don't know, Le Monde or The Guardian, or like to better understand what's going on in the community. So we really focus on building a content too on a long timeline. We want to do that too. I think it's important to build the community content by the time. It takes time.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't want to strangle this conversation. I don't want to stop it because I'm really, really enjoying listening to you. But I'd really like to take some time for audience questions and things as well. So if anyone's got any questions, you raise your little blue hand in Zoom. But at the moment, I can see that Heidi had asked a question about how you. Heidi, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? See, you've got your hand up. Can you unmute, Heidi?
Yeah. Thank you, Allan. Thank you, everyone. It's such an energizing talk. And I just wanted to ask you if you thought about how these publications that are mainly in English can be bridged to publications that are in other languages. So this topic doesn't only stay in an English speaking environment. I'm from Argentina, and I'm teaching actually a biodesign course, and I had to give all my students English literature, and they really struggle. So that's my question.
I don't have a good solution to this. I mean, I think that this is a problem that exists that has been unsolved for so many industries and so many, as we are a global community, every facet of this, the fact that we're all having this conversation in English and we can't have a little babble fish that simultaneously translates everything to us, I think is like the saddest missed opportunity about technology. Like the fact that it's not instantaneous yet, like at the UN, like why don't we all have that? You know what I mean? I don't have a good answer. And besides, urging students who are interested in this topic to get involved and become writers themselves and write stories about their own communities. For our publication, we're very small, and I think my editor is here, but you know, I would love any suggestions that you have on how to make that easier or better.
I would love to pay translators to translate articles for Grow. If anyone is here or your students, Heidi, want to translate our articles, like we would pay whatever the standard translator rates are, because that would be fantastic. I would love to have other languages represented.
Yo tengo la misma problema, so I do the Spanish thing too. Y yo tengo la misma problema. So actually, I'll just subtitle this. I have the same problem because I can read in multiple languages, and I constantly think about, so I can read this in English, but what about everybody else that has to go and Google translate every paragraph or every other thing? And by the time you're done reading it at the end, it's mentally exhausting when I can just read it in my native language and be done with it. So one of the things that that we found at the Biohacking Village was that there's a large deaf community. So we're always trying to figure out, like, how can we bring in signers and to figure this out. And because Defcon is a huge community of folks that speak English and other languages, you shouldn't have to just come here and have to conform to the English. So completely valid. I am totally on board with trying to figure out how to babble fish everybody.
Yeah.
Also try to translate from French to English or English to French, and it's also a good way to bring to the French audience. So I will be happy to share also text and translate to French eventually.
Noticed that reading some of your articles here, and you can switch really easily between the two. That's really useful. Has anyone else got any questions? You raise your hand. I'm trying to monitor the chat, but it's moving so quickly that it's difficult to keep track. If there's no questions just now.
Roland has a question.
Did Roland have one? Okay, sorry. Thanks for noticing that, Ewan. Roland, go ahead. Please ask us your question.
Thanks. I'm sorry if somebody already asked it, because simultaneously I was writing an email to Christina. Multitasking here, but my question is, which I also wrote in the chat, my question was, how do you relate to the field, to the hype? Because you're kind of in this new technology field and there's a lot of hype. And when things are published, or like when things are really new and are not really proven yet, like, how do you go about it? And what is your relation to that? And I would be especially interested in kind of hearing the differences in your approaches to kind of this. Because, for example, with this CRISPR vaccine, there's been so much hype around this thing. So how do you talk about it, right? What are your decisions? What are your choices?
Well, I feel pretty hyped about synthetic biology, to be honest, right? So like, I guess like I'm like literally a PR person. So like, I think hype is useful, but you have to like, but the whole idea to me, right? Like why we do it so in such like a complicated and expensive way is because the nuance is important, right? Like those different voices, like the caveats that are still interesting to read, right? Like, I don't actually believe that it, you know, right? Like, I don't know, people worry a lot about like clickbait and like, they just want to read like the dumb answers. I don't think that's actually true. I think it's just like, that's there, right? So like, I think people do want to read the more in-depth thing, like they, and we can make that. So I don't know. I guess I have a complicated relationship to hype. I'm curious what other people think.
I want to back up. I want to just sort of piggyback on what you're saying, Christina, because I agree that like, the nuance of the story is what makes a story interesting. Yeah. And so if you've read literally anything I've ever written, I'm highly critical of this community. And I'm often poking holes at things and trying to poke the bear and trying to find where things fall out. And one of the most interesting things that I see about sort of like the hurdles and sort of like where hype sort of falls off the edge and becomes like a reality is often policy related. And so since I came to community bio and sort of syn bio through a policy lens, I had been a technology reporter for many years looking at policy. I immediately go to, well, why is this project failing? Or why would this project fail? What's going to be the thing that keeps it from being realized? And a lot of times it's funding and government regulations. And so to me, like getting into that nitty gritty and explaining the stories of synthetic biology through things that people already know about, like politics or like local regulations, like, yeah, they suck even for this, you know, and sort of bringing that into it, I think is like my personal way of telling these stories. And I think that's really, really interesting and important too.
Got it. We actually, sorry, was that you, Ewan?
Well, yeah, just
Go ahead, mate.
don't believe the hype. When it's hype is too big, we just don't talk about it, because then it goes out of our own media. It becomes, you know, it's always everywhere in the mass media. Then we just don't think we have to talk about it. Otherwise, when we have to deal with it, we mostly rely on friends and sources and people we trust to have their appreciation of the issue or of the hype. And so it can help that way, but sometimes we just don't talk about it.
Thanks, Ewan.
Intentionally not talking about this.
Okay, so we're at time now, but we've got some more questions. So as long as everyone's okay with that, I'd like to keep picking your brains, because I think so everyone, there's another event, you know, if you need to go, please don't feel like I'm keeping you hostage here. But Nell has a question. If Nell, how do I find her? If you can unmute yourself, Nell, you can ask your question.
Hello. So most people know that I'm working with a lot of children at the moment, and science communication towards children is aimed at this very inaccessible language, especially for children in general. They don't understand what bioart is, they don't understand what design. I mean, the school I'm teaching at teaches them differential equations for 4 and 5 years old. That's kind of the thing. But the majority of them are disabled, so they have complex needs as well, which makes it even harder. And how do we do science communication in a way that disabled children also understand? So the majority of them have complex needs such as ADHD, autism. Some of them have Asperger's, for example, too. So how do we do science communication that also opens the door to them and doesn't shut them out of the talk that they should be part of?
I guess I would ask, like, what do you want, like what do you want to communicate, right? Like, what, knowing your audience, right? And what they care about and what matters to them, I think is the first challenge of science communication, of any kind of communication, right? So, and that matters, you know, even if they're politicians or they're 5-year-olds with autism. I think that, like, I don't know. I'm just thinking of my kids. So I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. Like, I'm not too worried about teaching them differential equations, right? Or like science communication per se. I guess, like, when I think about like young children, like I'm thinking about, like, how do I encourage their creativity? How do I like support them when they ask a question that is interesting, right? Like, how do I make them feel like loved and supported? That's much more important to me than them like knowing what I work on at that age. For like older kids, yeah, I think it really depends on what the context is. Like, I think for young but older kids, I'd say, like, for me, it's like, yeah, you can do this too, right? Like, I didn't know what it meant to be a scientist. My dad has a PhD in engineering. I still like didn't know what it meant to be a scientist until I was in college and like met professors, right? And I was like, oh, this is what it is, right? Like, and so, like, for someone who has such a privileged background to like that I needed that encouragement too. Like, anyway, there's things that I think are valuable to teach and to communicate to children. That don't have to be so like, I think there's a lot of sort of space to explore. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think in general also, how do we make science communication more inclusive in general, you know, different forms of literature and media. I have friends who are blind, you know, and they don't find science literature in Braille. you know, we have to 3D print a lot of equipment and things for them specifically that they can use. How do we start making things inclusive? I mean, I'm classed as disabled. I have MS. I use a walking aid. You know, I'm not allowed to sit in laboratories because they classify me as a hazard. But why are you classed as a hazard when you're just as able-bodied as the next person? How do we communicate that? And I think that's also a thing that we really need to see and highlight more, is a lot of the disabled community in science doing really awesome things.
Totally.
So
I really don't want to.
Oh, go.
No, I'm really sorry. I really don't want to stop this conversation, and especially at this point, 'cause it's really, I feel strongly about that. So I'm really sorry now to things up, but we've got one. If we take the last 1 minute, can I ask all the panelists to give us a tweet, 140 characters, on just to wrap up what they feel about our discussion. Then we can have a 10-minute break. Who's going to same order as before? So Alex, I'll ask you first.
Okay, thanks. This was such a good discussion. I agree. I feel like we should make this longer and definitely continue in the Slack. There are so many things that got brought up here today that I want to talk about. And this was kind of my intention when I suggested that we have this panel on the program. And like, I just want to say thank you to you, John, also for just asking such thoughtful questions, because obviously like the question is the first part of like what bubbles up all of these great ideas. So thank you so much. But I'll just go back to my first, statement, which was that I feel very passionately about everyone in this community telling their own stories. And that includes, you know, every kind of story to fit with every kind of person of the diversity that we see at this conference, and folks who aren't here and, you know, couldn't make it. That includes, you know, people who don't speak English as their first language, people who are classed as disabled, but obviously like now like is like just a huge part of this community. And those stories matter. And, you know, Biodesigned is new. We are soliciting pitches. So if you want to write and tell those stories, like, please come talk to me, come talk to Dan Grushkin. He's here too. You know, we're very open to, you know, setting the stage for what's coming next in this revolution. So that's what I'll say. Thank you so much for moderating, John, and for all the panelists for being here. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Ewan, can you give us a super brief roundup so we can get a small break of your feelings?
Conversation.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, well, that's make me thinking like we should actually share more, and maybe across the pond between US and Europe, maybe share more content, and we will be happy to do that. We don't have a correspondent in US, you know, we have in Japan, but we don't. So we will be happy to share more content, and on the same, send you content too if you want to.
I'm really sorry. I want to make sure we get a break, and also we get a family photo. So maybe while Nina and Christina give us a little roundup, we can take a fun family photo. So I'm really sorry, Pete. Nina and Christina look super fun, and I'm gonna take some photos of everybody. Well,
photo will be quick.
All right. There we go. Smile, everyone. Okay, great. Nina, can you give us 140 characters tweet super quick? We got a small break. Go on.
So we need more listening conferences to bring out the chasms and issues, whether they're negative or positive, with no egos, and so that we can listen to each other speak our truth and then integrate that into something bigger.
Thanks, Nina. Awesome. Christina?
Science is people. That's it. That's a tweet.
There we go. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. This has been awesome discussion. I really enjoyed speaking to you all. So thanks. Some great appreciation from everybody for our panel. Thank you very much, guys.